Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christie, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. As always, I have a fabulous guest with me who is going to change your perspective on leadership and give you lots of nuggets of wisdom. But before we jump in, I want you to make sure that you are following this podcast and that you are sharing it with your friends, because no one will know about Productive Joy if you don't tell them. And today is going to be one of those days you're going to want to share. So I have with me Davina Stanley. And Davina is a lot of things. So she is an author. She is a leadership guru. She's a grown boy mom, meaning her boys are grown. She's been married a very long time. She is an Australian who lives in Seattle. She's also jumped out of an airplane and she's been a car wreck survivor. So those are just some fun facts for my new friend Davina. But Davina, welcome to Productive Joy.
Thank you for having me. So good to be here. Really looking forward to talking about learning, particularly. I know it's something that we both really love thinking about.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I am so excited to get there. But you know what? People are finicky and they will really only listen for like the first 30 seconds or so. And then they're like, meh, whatever. So what would you say to this audience to convince them that this is an episode they don't want to miss?
Oh, I'd love to talk to them about how writing is a really slow way to think.
That sounds fun. I had a friend one time that would say that, how do you know what you think until you see what you write? But writing is a great way. Oh, okay. Well, then I want to know more about that, but let's learn more about you first. So Davina, tell us a little bit about you. I mean, Australian via Seattle is probably a good story, but where do you want to start? Why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Oh, now there's an open question. So how do I want to start? Well, I guess I've had quite an adventurous life. You know, I grew up on a potato farm in country Australia. I've lived in 3 of Australia's capital cities. I've lived in Hong Kong, New York, Tokyo, and I've also lived now in Seattle. And so I have my husband to thank for that. We have had a really adventurous life, and long may that continue to be adventurous. But we love living here in Seattle and plan to stay. So it's, yeah.
Is Seattle the only place that you've lived in the United States?
No, I've lived in New York also.
Oh, New York. Did I miss that one? Oh, my goodness. Okay. So you have been a big city liver for a long time. And you said your husband's the reason you moved around, but you have a pretty impressive leadership background in the things that you've done. So how did you manage to do that in all those different places?
Well, I took it in my suitcase, you know, and I think perhaps it's controversial to say that being a mom has given me a lot more flexibility in my career, right? And so we moved to Hong Kong for Andrew's work. He'd always wanted to live there. He wanted to work in finance. So we went to do that. But very soon after, he saw a job ad, which, you know, for me being a country kid, I had no idea I thought anything was possible, but had no idea what that was.
Sure.
And so he showed me this job ad that he thought initially, because he saw McKinsey and he thought, oh, I'd like that. And he had a look at it and he went, oh, no, that's for you. And he showed me. So it was a communication specialist role. And so I had worked freelance previously. So the idea of consulting wasn't new, but the idea of management consulting was very new. And I just thought, I looked at the advertisement and I don't know, do you know, sometimes you just get that knowing, that feeling, I think that's mine. And I had no idea how hard people try to get into McKinsey. I had no idea of any of that. So I just went through the process and met one of my very dearest friends actually in the interview queue. And we were, you know, they put you through all these rooms. You go from one person to the next, and you're all huddled together while you're waiting to be called. And I remember she and I had this lovely conversation and I thought, she's going to get that. That doesn't make sense. I thought I had this, you know, it's like, oh, that's disappointing. And she walked away. She had the same feeling, although at the time she said to me, oh, no, they're going to hire 2. But that's what they did. They hired us both.
Oh, nice.
So, so I joined McKinsey, and that just opened my eyes to all sorts of wonderful ways of thinking, which is what I focus on now, how to clarify your thinking when you're communicating and solving problems. And I do it in particularly organizations, sometimes in consulting firms, but more in organizations. And so that started me off on that journey. And McKinsey's very flexible. So I moved to New York. I had 2 very small children. I had a husband who traveled every week. And so it was like, well, I can't work here, so I'll renovate a house. And that got me out of like the normal working cycle, if you like. And so then we moved to Tokyo, and somebody that I'd worked with before said, "Oh, I hear you could work for us again." I went, "Oh yeah, I can. I think I can work here because of the immigration laws." And so they said, "Oh, could you do something for us in the marketing practice?" I went, "Sure." And that's where it began. So I freelanced for McKinsey for like 15 years,
Wow.
coaching their people. I worked for Firm Learning. I worked for the Asia Pacific marketing practice. I consulted for them on, discrete client projects and so on. And then jumped through a series of steps, and I started training in the Australian office and started teaching lawyers. I spent 5 years teaching lawyers how to get their advice across in 30 seconds, which, can be done. There you go, can be done. And no matter how complex it is. So it just grew organically like that. And, it's been terrific. I've just been able to make it my own as I've gone. And I think as my boys have gotten older, I've been able to change the way I work and do more. And it's just found a really nice balance, actually.
Oh, that is such a fascinating story. And I want to go back to the potato farm because you grew up in a country town. You said you've lived in multiple big cities in Australia, but growing up, what did you study? What did you know? What did you have in your back pocket that made you the right fit for this job opportunity that they obviously loved you so much they had you back? So what prepared you for that?
Well, I think partly because I didn't actually grow up in a town. I grew up quite remotely. So I grew up half an hour from town. And because we were on a state border, the reality was that it felt longer than that.
Sure.
It took me an hour and a half to get to school, hour and a half to get home on the bus. It was quite logistically different, back then. And, the internet and things like that didn't exist, right? The phone stopped ringing. We'd water a special spot in the garden because the earth was dry. So the phone would stop ringing for a few days. It was a very, very different way of living. So I grew up in a situation where problem solving was the norm, where I had the great luxury that I think young kids these days miss, and I so beg parents to bring it back, which is complete freedom to just be. Expectations on me were very different. I was expected to do well. I was expected to work hard. And I didn't have what some of my school friends had, which was, "Oh, it's harvest season, no school for you." My parents were adamant education really mattered, right? So I had education really matters. And I had parents who were very capable, and I had to solve problems. And I had maturity beyond my years simply because I was the oldest of 4 and 2 of them were very young. So I ended up semi-parenting from the age of 12 and for a whole lot of reasons. So, I think that just gave me a mindset that I didn't grow up in a town or a city where people might have been very deferential. I grew up to be polite, but if I thought I could see a solution to a problem, it didn't occur to me that bureaucracy was a thing. It's like, what's that? Oh, just go do it. Yeah. And, it's like, oh, I don't know what it really means to have a normal middle-class life. I come from a very capable family that does things, sure. But, what does it mean to have a white picket fence? My dream was to have the white picket fence in a lovely weatherboard home in Hawthorne in Melbourne. I thought that was my dream, and I'd never, didn't have big ambitions or anything. So it was just go do it,
Yeah. Well, okay. You said a couple things that were quite fascinating. The problem solving was the norm for you growing up. And then you didn't understand bureaucracy, so you just did. And It sounds to me like that's kind of a recurring theme in your life. Like you don't hear no, you hear, oh, we're going to move to Hong Kong. Sure. Oh, now New York.
Well, that took a bit of persuasion, can I tell you? Here's a fun fact. You
Is
asked
he in
us a fun
sales?
fact. 3 months before the wedding, I said to my husband, and I was like 23, maybe it was 4 months before. I said, oh, we could go backpacking one day. And he's like, oh, my dead body. And I went, oh, whoever doesn't want to do that? He said, well, if you want to do that, you better go now because I'm not coming with you.
Oh my
Make
goodness.
sure you go to Hong Kong on the way because I want to live there one day. I went, oh, all right then. So I went 3 months before the wedding. I took off with my backpack.
Yeah, you don't hear the word no, and I kind of love that. And so that has actually
to get me to Hong Kong, though, I tell you. Anyway,
it did take a lot. Well, it would take a lot for me to uproot like that too. But it's the problem solving part that I'm so fascinated with because you really do just see things differently and you're like, nope, I can solve that. I can fix that. And so you've actually written a couple books that have gotten some traction to show other people how your problem solving might work. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Elevate and Engage?
Love to. Okay, no, beautiful. So I started writing Elevate because, and that's a book for leaders. I started writing the leaders book because I work with leaders a lot. And, I might work with a senior person and show them how to clarify and crystallize a message on a page and say, look, now that you know how to do it, we need to get your people doing it.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that you need to do that are actually not very hard. They just require some discipline that you need to be doing to make sure that people don't go, oh, yeah, that was a good idea. That'll go away now. So, to drive an operating model around it so you can get your nights and weekends back. And you don't need to spend them iterating and track changes on these micro details in somebody's paper. You look at a draft and you think, oh, okay, there's great stuff here. It's going to take ages for me to think this through. I need a big block of time. I haven't got it. I've got to wait. And then it ends up being the night before or the weekend before. And you sit down and think, oh, crumbs, I've got to redo that. I do that thing. And then you end up reworking it. And so you end up doing your people's job for them. So how do leaders change the way they function so that they can get out of their team's way and let their teams prepare this communication that they need, which benefits everybody? Everyone wants to thrive and flourish and perform at their level. And the leaders do too. They don't want to be pulled back down. And the team members don't want to be having their leaders stomp all over their work with a red pen. So leaders book number 1, I wanted to codify what I was doing with leaders. Leaders who would say, oh, you mean I can just ask my people, maybe even require my people to use this one pager. And all I need to do is say, you must give it to me a week before the board paper's due or the steering committee paper's due. And I can access the information in it really fast. I can review it and send it back to them. And if it's a disaster, they can flip it back quickly, right? Because I can get to them quickly. I'm not going to be delayed. I'm not going to spend like a day reworking each paper, which is not an impossible thought, right? So the leader needs to know what they're doing to make some changes to make that happen. And so I started writing that and I thought, actually, I also need a book for the team member, right? Because it's the same methodology, but being looked at from a different perspective. And we're trying to change the operating rhythm so that everybody spends less time preparing communication, particularly buried in the weeds of track changes, and much more time on the smart stuff, which is so much more satisfying. It's like not here's the template, fill it in, quick. It's, okay, what do we want to achieve here? What do we want to deliver? How do we together bring our thinking forward so that early on we say, oh, that's the outcome we need from that paper. And that's the really precise person or small group of people we need to influence. Got it now? Okay, now that we've got that, the leader might help skeleton the story structure. Maybe I've got 10 patterns for doing that. Or they might say the team can do that. That's fine, depending on ability and all that sort of thing. And so then the team comes back with their ideas on that page. And the leader can say, oh, okay, awesome. Thank you. Or make these little adjustments. That's okay. But broadly, you got it, or here are my thoughts. And that response can happen really quickly. It's not delayed because it's hard, you
Oh,
know?
yeah.
So the leader and the team think sooner and they can iterate together much more quickly. And once that iteration's done and the messaging is worked out, then it's like, oh, now the document's easy. Write it, bang, done, easy, because I know what I'm going to say. There's a lot of people say, oh, writing's the best way to think. It is a great way to think. It's just really slow. In business, you don't have time.
No,
You don't
no.
have time. So you can hack it. You can hack it if you collaborate in a really time-efficient way. And it's much more fun, to use your language, much more joyful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and actually that leads me right to my next question. So, Davina, what I hear is that you have literally found a wand that you can wave over an organization to find them time. And you find them time to be more precise with their products so that they can get to the point faster. That's essentially what you do, which is incredible. And so my question that I ask every guest that I have, and it's a super important one, is what is your definition, or how would you describe productive joy? Because you're going into businesses and you are kind of giving them their time back, but how would you describe productive joy?
I think of it in terms of satisfaction.
Mm.
You know, that feeling of, I think happiness can be really fleeting, and joy does speak to a much deeper sense. And I think it's very aligned with satisfaction, where you think, wow, I did a good job today. I can feel like I achieved something that, that feeling of when you do a puzzle and it's like, got it, and the structured communication technique I use is a bit like a puzzle. And so it's like, oh, the bits have come together now. Click, got it. It's just really satisfying. And to have people say things to me, I'll give you an example from this week, and this is just a little one. I'd worked with a team, and honestly, the team really struggled with the method. And then somebody emailed me after our last workshop, and he said, oh, you won't. I was really surprised by this. I sent the recommendation to this woman called Roz, and she came back in minutes. And I could tell that by the timestamp, right? Because I knew he sent it after a meeting. It was really fast. She came back within minutes and said, thanks, David. That never happens. It's normally at least 2 30-minute calls because she's got loads of questions and stuff. She just got it. And he's like, who would have thought, right? So that's just a little example.
It's a perfect example of productive joy, right? Like, so both parties felt more joyful in that space because they were able to get their jobs done and do it well. I have a theory that there is not a person on the planet who wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be terrible at my job today.
Oh, no.
But people are, we know they are, because we don't set them up for success, right? So great leaders set their people up for success by being clear with their expectations. And you have found a formula and written 2 books about it to get people to that place of clarity that's replicable. That's amazing. So did you just wake up one day and say, you know what, I think this is something that I can turn into a book? Or did somebody say to you, Davina, you need to make this a book? Like, how did that come to be?
That's a great question too. So I think, like lots of problem solving, it's incremental, isn't it? We go on a journey and we try things and we learn things and so on. And I think the biggest epiphany for me was when I realized, this method that I use is ubiquitous across consulting. It's called the pyramid principle, the basis of what I do. And I was helping clients, and I would realize that they'd have a story to tell. They'd tell me maybe over 10 minutes, what they needed to convey and their problem around it, the stakeholder situation. And I'd say, oh, well, maybe you could tell it like this or like that or like that. So because I had this beautiful structured framework with 2 base structures, like I could bounce off from that and say, oh, well, you could do it this way, this way, this way, because I've just seen so many. And I started doing that a lot. And then that plus this one-pager business, structuring things on a page. And they're sort of percolating in, the law, teaching lawyers, teaching finance people, teaching people in business, all these different places, and starting to crystallize that there's actually a small number of these patterns, and, going further with it, and, realizing that, yes, that's true. But if we want to really get the most out of this, we've got to get leaders involved.
Right.
And I was doing that in my consulting work. And I wanted something to give my leaders to say, here, take this physical thing, this book, so that you've got a physical thing as a reference, so that when I'm not with you, you've got a toolkit. So that's where, this pair of books came from. And I realized that it would be helpful to them to have a book. And I've got an online course that matches Engage, the contributors book, let's call it that, as well. And, different people like learning. You are also a teacher originally. And so you understand different people engage with information in different ways. So I've got two different ways that they can help their people learn. Maybe the leader does it themselves. The book sets up so they could. Maybe they like a book to help their people to take the load off them. Maybe they'd like an online course. It's a different way of just accessing things. So I wanted a toolkit that enabled more people to have the luxury of that experience that I had at McKinsey combined with the experience that I've had, So
Well,
I wanted to
all the
help a bit more.
experiences. Davina, you've had a couple experiences that have brought you to this point. What I love that you've done, though, is that you did put it in a package that's repeatable. And that is a superpower. Not everyone can do that, right? Because it doesn't require you, but it can involve you, right? Like so what I'm hearing is there are some options for people if they wanted to find you, which we're getting ready to ask how we can find you. But one way would be to bring you in and let you work with the team. Another would be to purchase either one of these books and go through it themselves, or go on an online course. How cool that there are 3 different distinct ways that people can engage, to use the name of the book, to engage with your information and take all this stuff and turn it into a one-pager. I'm a big fan of a one-pager. My book actually talks about one-pagers too, because it does take a whole lot of information and makes it digestible. It makes it usable. But what you do to take it to the next level is that it's not just usable, it's transferable into a product, which is really, really powerful. So if somebody wanted to find you, how would they do that?
So I think my website is a great place to start, and that's clarityfirstprogram.com. So that, and look, I write regularly on LinkedIn as well. So they just look me up on LinkedIn. That's also another great place to find me.
Perfect. And we'll put all of that in the show notes so that people can see it. But it's just, I have so enjoyed just your like, I want to talk to you about your life a whole lot, and I don't have time to do that today. So I think we might just have to bring you back at some point, because I mean, I don't meet too many people who've lived in that many big countries and cities and done so gracefully, which, I mean, even if you didn't want to go to Hong Kong, there you were. And
I loved it once I got there. Believe me, I really did. It's just, as an early 20s person who's been overseas once in her life,
Yeah, that's big.
Really overseas.
Big. Now, were your kids born there?
One was born in Hong Kong. One was born in New York.
Oh, wow. So interesting. Well, those are fun stories to just tell. Like you could tell all the stories. Okay. So speaking of, I want to learn a little bit more about you, and we're going to do that through rapid fire questions. Are you ready? You excited? I can tell you're super excited. Okay. So what, Davina, is your definition of fun?
My definition of fun. Oh, now it's supposed to be rapid fire, which means
Oh, that's okay. If you have to think for a second.
No, that's all right. What is my definition of fun? I just love being with my friends, which sounds very boring, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. What do you do when you're with your friends?
On a great walk and talking and shooting the breeze about life, the universe, and everything. I just love those friendships where you can do that. Those friendships that you pick up anytime, and they're just, still there.
Oh, I love that. And so I still once a year get together with my girlfriends from high school. We are all very far removed from high school, however, and that's the way it works for us. We can pick up right where we left off. And I think there's something special about that. I love that.
Very.
Okay, great answer. Great answer. How do you know that you are showing up as your authentic self?
I think that's an ongoing project, isn't it? As we get older, to actually know ourselves well enough. I think for me, that's something I feel in my body. And if I feel my neck is tight and maybe my breathing and my chest are tight, I know that I'm not. So I think for me, it's about having that sense of calm. And, I don't know if you think about it this way, but we have voices in our heads speaking to us. We're not insane, right?
Yes.
Not
No, there are voices.
normal voices. And the calm voice, when the calm voice is speaking, all is well. When the screechy voice, the panicky voice is speaking, all is not so well, So listen for the voice and feel the body. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good answer. I like that. Okay, how do you channel your best self on your worst days?
Oh, with great difficulty.
Yeah, that's honest.
I do lots of non-sleep deep reset between coaching calls.
Well, you're giving so much of you're giving so much of yourself, right? And it's really difficult to recharge. You can't pour from an empty cup. So I appreciate
That's why I
that.
have someone else do my diary, right?
Yeah.
Because she protects my boundaries so much better than I do.
Oh,
Right. And I put rules around it, and we do break them. But it's like this many hours facilitating in a week, this many hours between sessions. And particularly given my practice is global, if I finish at 10 o'clock one night, I don't start at 7 o'clock the next day.
Yeah.
Rules
Oh.
that someone else looks after.
That's smart, because otherwise you would be trying to pour from an empty cup. And that's and then you're not giving anybody your best, including yourself.
Right.
No, that's important. All right. So big question for you. We talked about this at the beginning, and I'm going to be curious where you're going to land. So people can really only remember one thing from our time together. So if you can only get them to remember one thing from our 30-minute time, what would that one thing be?
But I'd love them to think about crystallizing their message in a really structured way together, rather than assuming that writing is the best way to think. Writing is not the best way to think at work.
Oh,
Not the fastest way to think, and I don't think it's the best way either.
I love that. I love that. I love the clarity of that. And you landed right where you thought you were going to land. So look at you go. That is not always true. Not always true. Well, Davina, you could have been doing 956 other things, but you chose to spend some time here on Productive Joy. So on behalf of the Productive Joy family, I want to say thank you. Thank you for bringing your brilliance. Thank you for sharing that brilliance. And thank you for making us a little better and brighter because of it. So thanks for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me. I've loved our conversation.
Good, good. And for all of our listeners, thank you for giving us your time as well. Your time is just as precious. And we're really glad that you chose to get your shot of B12 here on Productive Joy. So thank you so much for listening. Make sure you share this episode. And as always, I want to challenge you to figure out a way to turn fun into action.